Hi, this is video number 1 on forms. In this video, I'm going to give you some general tips, I'm going to show you some free sources, and I'm going to get you started on using forms on Bloomberg Law. Alright, so let's do some general tips first. Here are a few general tips. The first is that there are some basic forms on the mass.gov website that might be useful. My next tip is that large form databases like the ones that were mentioned in the Cali lessons don't always contain all the forms you might have available to you on that particular research platform. One example I can think of are the MCLE publications. These publications often have useful forms that may not be included in a large Massachusetts form database. My third tip is if you can find a form with annotations, these are going to be more useful for your drafting than forms that do not have any explanation of the clauses contained in the document. Say, for example, you're asked to draft a complaint in an employment law action, or you have to draft a complicated executive employment agreement. If you're not familiar with drafting this type of pleading or agreement, these annotated forms will help you understand why various provisions are included and worded in a certain way. My final tip is that although forms can be a great place to start with your drafting, you always need to adapt the forms to fit your client's needs and particular circumstances. The first place I am going to look for forms is using the research guides from the Law Library webpage. Once the Law Library webpage, choose the Research tab and then Guides and Treatises. After that, I picked Massachusetts Legal Research. You might notice there are a lot of guides here on other topics, but the one that I'm going to look for now is forms. On this guide, we have listed alphabetically many different areas of law. I just picked civil procedure to give you an idea of how to find forms using this guide. So on this guide, you can get entries not just for forms themselves, but for treatises or practice materials that contain forms, along with a notation as to where you can find the source in print or online. So for example, the first one, the Massachusetts Basic Practice Manual, is something that's available in the MCLE library. The Massachusetts Pleading and Practice Forms, that one's on Lexis, and the last one listed, Procedural Forms Annotated, that would be, in addition to being in print, something you could find on Westlaw. The mass.gov is a good website to find simple Massachusetts legal forms. There are two different places to go to get forms on this website. One is a collection that they call Legal Forms. They describe these forms as forms you don't usually file in court. So for example, something like a healthcare proxy. For these forms, you're going to go to Case and Legal Resources tab, and you can see the breadcrumb trails above. That's how I got into this page. And another good way to find this would be to just Google Massachusetts legal forms, and for me this page is one of my top search results. So this isn't the whole page, but you can get a sense of the different types of forms that are included in this database. For example, there's a form for a name change or one for a guardianship. The other helpful link is the one to court forms. So these would be forms that you might file in court. And to get here, you're going to be in the Massachusetts court system, and it's just under the Forms tab. So here you can search by forms, you can get a list by topic or by court, or you can search by keyword. I just used the list by topic feature and went to the forms for bar application. When I clicked this forms list, there were 3 forms listed that relate to bar applicants, including the form to allow law students to practice under Rule 3.03. Let's just take a quick look at that form. It's a fairly simple form that you could fill in the fields and print the PDF. I did want to point out that there are a few footnotes at the bottom, including one that references the SJC Rule 303. So these are the types of things that you're going to want to be looking for when you're trying to determine how useful the form is. So ease of use features like, can you type right into the form? Can you modify the language? Can you download it as a PDF or a Word document to work with? Also, look to see if there are any helpful annotations or footnotes that help you to understand the law that would be either included in the form or driving the language of the form. Okay, let's shift gears and talk a little bit about forms on Bloomberg Law. I'm going to show you one good place to get started on Bloomberg Law for forms and just also for other research and getting familiar with this database. I'll talk a little bit about transactional forms, and for litigation resources, we'll take a quick look at the Getting Started page, and that's where you can go to get a few sample documents, but most of the resources that we're going to discuss, we'll discuss later when we're talking about dockets and filings. Finally, I wanted to remind you about the secondary sources on Bloomberg Law that might have associated forms. For Massachusetts materials, the main source that we would look at would probably be the MCLE treatises. Another source that might be helpful are some of the BNA materials. They're not specific to Massachusetts, but they often have helpful forms and checklists. When you're getting started on Bloomberg Law on the home page, if you scroll down a little under Law School Success, there are a number of helpful resources, and we're going to look at the practice ready resources here. So let's just look at that. Once you click into the practice ready resources, what you get are resources organized by either litigation or transactional resources or a few other categories. And this one is showing you what's available for litigation resources. You can see that we get some intro video, research guides, sample documents, and some other suggested resources. We get the same for transactional resources. You see a video, a few sample agreements, overviews of some common types of agreements, and boilerplate clauses. So these practice-ready resources can be a good place to start, not just for forms, but in general if you aren't familiar with using Bloomberg Law. Okay, let's look at some other ways to get into forms. Last week, Rick mentioned the practice centers. This is one way we could get into sample agreements and forms. So I chose the Practice Center tab, and then I picked Corporate Practice Center to show you how you would get into these materials. Once in the Practice Center, I chose Transactional Resources, and this gives me many helpful different types of resources, but one that would be really useful for looking for forms, or two I should say, are the Dealmaker Document Search that would pull up actual documents that have been filed, or the Dealmaker Clause Search. Okay, so these searches are search for documents or clauses that were contained in documents that have been filed by public companies. So none of these will be annotated or have notes, but you can look at sample documents that have actually been used by companies. So for example, you could find merger agreements, bylaws, or executive employment agreements that have been filed with the SEC by these companies. There are some other helpful sample documents on this page as well. For example, if you look under governing documents right at the bottom there would be some, in this tab, some sample governing documents that you could find here. My final tip on Bloomberg Law is that I want you to remember that there are often forms available in some of the books and treatises on this research platform. So from the home page, you go in, and if you choose books and treatises, you can search in the books and treatises to get to these materials that might have some helpful forms. Okay, so that was just a little bit of a background information on a few different places to get started to find Massachusetts legal forms.